Today, we'll have a brief conversation on self-pity and how to dismantle it. First, we have to acknowledge that we have it. Self-pity is totally common and natural. It's a reflex or an impulse in response to things not going our way, and in combination with the feeling of entitlement that they were supposed to go our way. So self-pity is a product downstream of complaint. When we complain about something, whether to ourselves or to others, plus we feel helpless, that's the twist where self-pity starts to emerge. So the Serenity Prayer describes the strength for dealing with what we can and the patience to allow what we cannot control. That leaves no room for self-pity. That's the beauty of the Serenity Prayer. Self-pity is very chaotic, very destructive. It's not productive. We can't indulge in it, but that's exactly what it is, a temptation to go down the path of least resistance, mentally and emotionally. It's a neurohormonal state or an attitude that all of us can relate to, we're familiar with, and we can therefore forgive and be okay with, but that doesn't mean we have to stop there. And that's what the purpose of this video is. In fact, forgiving self-pity, just acknowledging its existence and allowing it to be, is in fact the very first step in healing it. As a physician, I know the importance of people being able to come to me with their secrets, things that they're ashamed about, because otherwise they would be lost or trapped in their own psyche and have a difficult time because of shame or guilt or stigma or taboo, talking about things in their lives that may be socially unacceptable, either to themselves or to others in their life based on the way they've been programmed, brought up, trained, educated, and brainwashed by their social class, by their language, by their culture, by their religion, by their personal experiences, and by their past at large. The sense that something is unforgivable or a shame or something to be guilty about is very disempowering, and it is a kind of bind. It's a kind of tightness or boundary. It's a kind of captivity that we suffer from when we are not awakened to our programming. And so healing has, as one of its very first steps, confession or disclosure or honesty and truth. Reality to the rescue, as I like to say, RTTR, Ritter. So this is a Ritter philosophy or coaching program whereby the truth shall set you free, but it'll have its way with you first. So it needs to come through us, and the healer's work is to make that coming through us as seamless and painless as possible, just like a midwife or a labor and delivery doctor or nurse helps the baby come through the parent smoothly with minimal friction, whether it's using mineral oil or using Lamaze breathing techniques or hypnosis or acupuncture, or actually cutting tissue called an episiotomy to make the opening, the birth canal bigger. So we're all trying in some ways to have a more controlled experience of things coming through us, whether those are physical things, emotional things, mental things, financial things, or social things. What it means to become transparent is to let the light pass through us. And the truth will set us free, and we have the opportunity to become cleaner channels for the truth, better channels for the truth. Life becomes better for us when we have more answers to more questions. That's what expertise and mastery is. That's what it is to become a more valuable person. So to become a more valuable person means to make someone else's dreams come true to some degree. It's not binary, it's on a spectrum. Or to make someone else's nightmares disappear to some degree. It's not binary, it's on a spectrum. And self-pity is quite the nightmare. It's quite the mental and emotional bind, which also leads to being physically bound, which also means to being financially and socially bound or limited or restricted or constrained. So self-pity is in fact a kind of evidence or advertisement of how constrained our will is in that moment. Because self-pity further constrains our will after exposure to or awareness of some other constraint on our will. So if, for instance, I say, if I had more money, I would be more free. That's obviously true for every person. There's diminishing marginal returns at some point, but for all of us, practically speaking, more money would make us more free. It is absolutely relative. There are some people for whom more money would make them even more free than more money would make us more free. But this is a personal development course, so we don't have to split hairs about moral philosophy with respect to our obligations to people halfway across the world, or even just down the street in our own neighborhoods. I'm happy to entertain that conversation, but this is constrained currently. We're channeling this conversation, our attention, our time, and our energy to this matter of dismantling self-pity. If I have done it for myself, for instance, or someone else has been enlisted, enrolled, and hired by me or by anyone to help me dismantle my own self-pity, then I have some authority on the subject, and that's a beautiful thing. Furthermore, if I've helped other people dismantle their self-pity, then I am, to whatever degree, an authority on that subject. And I can say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that my level of self-pity has been progressively decreased over the years, and that I'm extremely interested and somewhat knowledgeable about how it has happened. Now consider this. Who has knowledge about how the self-pity they have came to be? Most people are not invited to even question the current level of self-pity in their own psychological experience or in the psychological experiences of others. However, if we are so bold and audacious as to ask that question, in fact, we will start to understand a lot more about the origins of self-pity just by asking the question and having a specific kind of discussion about it, which is called clean stamina. And we'll discuss that in future chapters. But the question is, if we have a way to play with self-pity, to hold it in our hands, and to actually address it, then isn't that worth discussing? Isn't it worth at least admitting that we have self-pity, which is a big first step that many people have not been invited to take. But I present this video as an invitation, as well as a proposal, as well as an intervention or even equation that says, out of disclosure will arise awareness, and out of awareness will arise healing. And these are all probabilistic, of course. It could be that out of disclosure will arise a backlash, and that is what most of us are accustomed to, because we are still living like we are children and do not have an ability to control our environments or to think probabilistically about the likely responses of the people around us. And furthermore, are brainwashed like sheep and cattle into not being experimental with how we express ourselves, such that the outcome of this whole ensemble is that we just tolerate and accept things as they are without question, including this notion that, well, we cannot actually control our emotions. We cannot actually control our minds. We cannot actually control our knowledge, skills, attitudes, and beliefs, or the feelings that we tend to feel on a daily basis. The other extreme is that we can control those things. We can practice body control. We can practice emotional control, and we can practice mind control. And that by practicing these things, we actually grow that muscle, those muscles, and that it does not at all have to be a sacrifice or unpleasant to practice self control. That in fact, the opportunity to practice self control is a blessing and a gift unto itself, which most of us are not at all practicing or even aware of because of the level of consciousness that we grew up in being insecure. Insecurity is one band of energy that includes anger, like the bully, fear, like the coward, and grief, like the victim. Those three subpersonalities within us are all insecure and all have a tremendous degree of self pity. So when you start to realize that self pity actually lives at a certain band or frequency of the human experience, and that human experience is principally mediated through the nervous system, which is a magical, interwoven, gossamer network of living tissue that's colonized and colonizing, articulate through our entire body, and that our nervous systems are actually what are communicating with each other when we talk to each other. It's not my body talking with someone else. It's not my body even being transmitted to you right now through this video. It's my nervous system. It's my thoughts and my beliefs as I have arranged them in such a way as to be maximally useful to you, dear viewers. Now, when you start to see that self-pity is actually something that exists on a certain band of existence, which I call F that fangers because it sinks its teeth into you, that is frustration, disappointment, anger, trauma, fear, anxiety, negativity, guilt, envy, regret, and sadness. That family of hooligans that live inside of us and live between us, and that we co-create whenever we have an energetic cycle, aka a conversation or a relationship. These are energetic cycles that we're participating in, where energy is flowing through us and then flowing into other people and then flowing back into us through those other people on whatever time scale you want to slice it. That is our reality. You notice that self-pity is a kind of toxic influence if your standard for your experience is at a higher level of frequency, then you feel self pity pulling you down. However, if you have not learned to have higher standards for your own lived experience as controlled by yourself, then you can just settle for self pity, which makes you then dependent on others for fixing your situation. And it just becomes a way of living, a way of surviving off of charity and pity and compassion and empathy of others, which is perfectly fine. It's a level of consciousness which is called insecurity. Insecurity and self pity travel together. They travel with anger, like the bully, grief, like the victim, and fear, like the coward. And they're described as dependent. All three of these are dependent. And to just go a little bit further into my own personal philosophy and branding, the coward is a heart of glass, wherein they shatter and easily, they shatter easily. The coward shatters easily, they fall to pieces. And when you read parenting books, you learn about this as one of the distinctions, for instance, between French parenting and American parenting, as popularized by Pamela Druckerman in her book, Bringing Up Bebe, which we're reading right now. Falling to pieces is something that children do, and it's actually strategic after some point. It becomes baked into the subconscious that we can manipulate other people by falling to pieces, and that the victim, the coward, and the bully all know how to do that. And the coward is the perfect archetype or quintessence or exemplary, aka example of falling to pieces, shattering, and then damaging other people, hurting other people, holding them hostage. This is like emotional terrorism. So the bully, the coward, and the victim all participate in a kind of emotional terrorism, and we all do it to each other when we're at that level of insecurity. Frustration, disappointment, anger, trauma, fear, anxiety, negativity, guilt, envy, regret, sadness. That whole vibration travels together, and it is mimetic or contagious, like a mind virus, like a heart virus. like a financial virus and like a social virus. It ripples through our existence. We are powerful and we have influences on other people. Others are powerful and they have influences on us. Influence is like a river, like a current, like a flow, like a vibration, like a frequency. And when you awaken to the influences that others are having on you, as well as the influences that you're having on others, which means to own the inner bully, to own the inner coward, and to own the inner victim, to embrace them, rather than to deny them and orphan them and dismiss them and justify and rationalize them. We're not talking about honoring them as in letting them run the show, just like we wouldn't honor children by letting them run the show. We honor them by recognizing them as insecure and therefore coming to their rescue as a higher consciousness, as a reality, we ourselves, that can be inclusive of those things. I am a reality that can include self pity. And in so doing, the healing process actually already begins. And if you followed along so far, you can feel it. You can understand what I mean by, I'm sure there's going to be questions, but you can understand what I mean by being someone who does not hate themselves, being someone who does not pity themselves. These two things are actually both only on the other side of self control. Self control is something that you can only do after you've gotten over yourself and gotten under yourself and gotten ahead of yourself and gotten behind yourself and gotten around or outflanked yourself. So, for anyone who wants to do that now, the next step is to notice that yourself is a data structure. It's a fluid mosaic data structure. It's a river of data. Yourself is actually a flowing river that you can become aware of. Yourself, the object, is something you can become aware of as a subject. You can make room for yourself, including the shitty parts, including the ugly parts, like the self-pity, the toxicity, the victimhood, the cowardice, the bullying that you do, according to yourself or according to others. The more interested and curious we can stay about our worst sides, the less of a coward we become. The more we face these things, the less of a bully we become, the more open we are to hearing other people's negative stories about us because we don't shoot the messenger, and the less of a victim we become. Because now people are actually less interested in taking advantage of us because the thing that we have to value, which is the path itself that we are on, is something that we can give to others that empowers them without disempowering us. That's what the victim does. The victim empowers others by disempowering themselves. And so they create on the other side of that equation a parasite or a bully. Most people don't want the power over me that I give them. I know my wife doesn't. She doesn't want me to be dependent on her for validation. And so the journey of our relationship has been, quite frankly, discovery and self-awareness about how often self-pity and needy desperation, thirsty hunger for validation is the motivation for the interaction. And that by decreasing self-pity and decreasing self-hate and decreasing self-blame, which are all a matter of forgiveness, which we'll address in a future video, we can actually stop needing validation from other people, because it's only that pre-existing self-doubt, self-hate, self-pity that then puts us in the position of the bully, the coward, or the victim, and makes us need to be reassured by others that we are good enough, that we are good people. But other people don't necessarily want all that power in our lives. And in fact, they're grateful when we take that power back and become leaders of ourselves. Because people want leaders. People are attracted to leaders. Most people are not attracted to followers because they themselves are already followers. We ourselves are already so dependent, so insecure, so bully, coward, or victim already. Subconsciously, we recognize that, which leads to the low self-esteem, leads to the self-pity and is a reinforcing, self-reinforcing, self-propagating, self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a vibration that just perpetuates itself, that when we meet someone who has some ability to keep the vibration high and maybe can even talk about it explicitly, as well as the pitfalls associated with these practices, that's very attractive. Leaders are attractive, the independent are attractive. So bullies, cowards, and victims are not necessarily attractive except to each other. They are attracted to each other because they can relate to each other, but they're also disgusted and disgusting by each other. Only the person or the consciousness or the nervous system which can tolerate all of those three, including and starting with, if you like, within oneself, and forgive all of those tendencies and programming, and not descend and revert to scapegoating any of those three. Don't scapegoat the victim, don't scapegoat the coward, and don't scapegoat the bully. That becomes a kind of vibe on its own that is delicious. And it is a dose and a rush. Now let's unpack dose. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphin. My mom taught me that from Rick Hansen, I believe. And to be able to dose yourself is incredibly powerful. That frees you from drugs, alcohol, and validation from other people. To be able to dose yourself, which is a matter of self-control, and is part and parcel or one with getting over yourself so that you can do things to yourself, like dose yourself, give you a kind of freedom that is therapeutic of self-pity. So if this diagnosis is self-pity, which only you can do for yourself, because when someone else does it for you, it is an out that the ego can always use to say they're attacking me, they're insulting me, they don't have my best interest in mind, so I'm going to stop listening to them. You first have to have your best interest in mind, which all of us actually, thankfully, tend to do. And then notice that it is in your best interest to discover what you are, who you are, what you're made of, and that obviously self-pity is there naturally. It's just such a foundational constitutive element of our composition or what we're made of that you can forgive it. So violence falls in this category. You can forgive violence when you realize we're all quite violent creatures and that has a role to play in self-defense, so that it is not in fact violence itself that's the problem, but our level of consciousness that's the problem, which is why martial artists who become stewards of violence and people who are responsible gun owners are safe sources. I am, for instance, a responsible drug purveyor. I give drugs that are psychoactive and influence consciousness as my day job. And my side hustle here is to share words and ideas that have the opposite effect of the drugs. These words and ideas elevate consciousness. That's what they're intending to do. And it is one of my precepts that I intend to elevate consciousness and enlighten and awaken with these words while being at peace with sleepwalking. I'm okay if what I do is actually accidentally lowering your consciousness, because it is my intention not to hurt you, not to lower your consciousness, not to turn you off. And it's been my experience that by being okay with that, I actually do a probabilistically better job of enlightening, awakening, prompting, provoking, stirring up shit and drama for the purposes of resolution. So I ask you questions, I bring up these issues that are challenging but not traumatic, so that we can dismantle these toxicities like self-pity that find their way into our lived experience and which can in every instance be an opportunity for awakening to our nature, to our essence, which is vibratory, which is probabilistic, which is frequency based, which is a tone or a series of tone or harmonics or a series of harmonies. And that there is a kind of romantic poetry to even the worst moments in life, which is part of the importance of art and photography, that we can capture through a certain kind of attitude something beautiful in a moment of darkness and ugliness. That I have a game that I've discovered, that I've been taught, and that I've rebranded through my own life experiences and inspirations, called Clean Stamina, which is a vision of how life can be, which includes, for instance, less self pity. And so we bring our self pity to this game. It's a language game, it's a neuro linguistic programming game. And what it does is crack open by disarming the radioactive third rail topics like success, like money, like spirituality, like violence, like drugs, like sex, like life and death, like mental disease, like homelessness, like addiction. And it says, maybe we have more control over our circumstances than we have been raised and conditioned to believe. So, with that in mind, we can consider toxicities as something identifiable that we can diagnose as we become more versed in energy healing, in light healing, in the power of words, the power of truth, the power of self-disclosure and of transparency, right? Transparency or translucidity. We're talking about the passage of light, and that by shedding light on things like self-pity and addiction, by becoming more therapeutically aligned with each other, we can awaken to how traumatically aligned we are with each other and make a conscious intention to move towards healing each other and away from traumatizing each other, towards making each other look and feel good, as well as making ourselves look and feel good, and away from the intuitive move, which is to make ourselves and others look and feel bad. Why is that the intuitive move? We can talk in the future about negativity bias and our obsession and fetish with violence, but for now, we'll simply say that it is our inheritance. It is our inheritance that the path of least resistance is the destructive path. That is the easiest way to summarize and to put this issue to rest, that it's undeniable that we are programmed and wired by our genetic history as well as our personal biographical history to play it safe, to destroy anything that is a threat to us, and that it takes tremendous creativity, imagination, confidence, faith, belief, science, spirituality, and success to open our doors to strangers, to override our built-in immune system that rejects new things. And that this won't happen on its own. The resolution of insecurity is not something that we can expect to happen on its own after we make enough friends, after we make enough money, after we live in a pretty enough city. This is a separate issue that must be addressed explicitly and ideally with a plan, with mentorship, with supervision, because this is the wilderness. This is the emotional wilderness that is coming in to our fortress, and it's up to us. No one can do it for us. It's up to us to go out and face it and to colonize and civilize the uncivilized, uncolonized, ungoverned parts of us. So the wilderness, be it physical, emotional, mental, financial, or social, is within all of us. And in this case, takes the form of self-pity And it is something that I am encouraging us to get aggressive about, to start going after rather than waiting for it to come to us. And that the way to do that is with the right tools in place, which I've made available at cleanstamina.com, which I am making available at cleanstamina.com, which I look forward to hearing your reviews on just as soon as you can get your hands on it. Thanks again for letting me into your life, into your world, and for sharing what you're going through with me. Because this healing process really is precious and something I'm very excited to enjoy together. Bye for now.